Thank you for coming. This training is going to be about what IET is and more specifically how to enter them into Utopia. We have ran a few of the NRS reports and we have found that some of our IET numbers are lower than what we anticipated. So we decided to put together a quick training to figure out or to explain exactly what IET is in case there are any questions about what IET is. As well as to show you how to enter them into Utopia so that we can correctly identify these students that are taking advantage of these IET classes that we are providing. So this PowerPoint presentation is going to be split into two parts. The first part is going to be ran by Stephanie Patton. She is going to explain exactly what IET is and answer any questions that you have there. And then the second part, I have a bunch of screenshots of Utopia on how to enroll a student into IET, how to mark them as IET, as well as how to separate them after they are done with any of their IET classes. You're welcome to, there's a hand raising feature if you have any questions. There's also the chat available. We will keep both of them open and available if you have any questions, but at this time I will turn it over to Stephanie.
All right, welcome. And I'm going to apologize to Adam. I think I stressed him out a little bit because I came, anyway, right at 3:01. Anyway, but I'm here. So we just wanted to take this time to really dive into IET just for a minute, mostly focusing on the Utopia side of things to make sure that our reporting is done correctly. But in order for that to really be appropriate, you have to understand what IET is. So I'm going to talk about IET. Adam, if you want to go to the first slide. And IET is like one of, I think, the most complicated program type that adult education offers, right? Because there are these specific pieces that make an IET program. So you can have very IET-like programs that actually aren't IET unless they meet this specific definition. So when we're talking about IET, we want to talk about a service approach that it provides adult education activities concurrently and contextually with workforce preparation activities and workforce training for specific occupation or occupational cluster for the purpose of educational and career advancement. And so for the first couple of, for these first couple of minutes, I'm going to dive into the specific parts of that definition. So note, first of all, that there are three different pieces, right? We have adult education activities, workforce preparation activities, and workforce training. And those are the three specific components. Again, underlined, right? The other parts that we want to dive into a little bit is that all three of those components have to be provided concurrently and contextually. So oftentimes the traditional pathway for students, right, is to go to adult education, complete your diploma, and then you go get some workforce training in whatever occupation you decide to focus in on. Well, the purpose of IET is to accelerate that pathway for students. And so instead of doing it in a linear fashion, right, we're talking about doing it at the same time. So that's that concurrent piece. And so while you're enrolled in adult education, you're completing your English language acquisition program, or you're completing your high school diploma, or you're building your academic skill levels. At that same time, you're also engaged in these other pieces of workforce preparation activities and workforce training. And so that's accelerating the path for the students and helping them get to the place where they're having a sustainable career quicker. So the other piece, right, is the contextually. So when you're providing the adult education activities, those might look a little bit different for an IET program than they would for your traditional population. And that's because you can contextualize the instruction so that it's focused on a specific occupation or occupational cluster. So for instance, if you were teaching a math class for an IET program, that math might be focused on, and the IET program is for a welding, occupation, then that math might be focused on specific components that relate to welding. I should not have chosen welding because I don't know much about welding, but it might be a temperature or measurement, or being able to, read and understand like ratios, right? From a blueprint to actually making that blueprint into a real thing, right? But it would be related to the occupation. And so your math might look a little bit different because it's contextual, or whatever that subject is. That's an important piece. And we'll dive a little bit more into the specific occupation or occupational cluster in a minute too. You want to go to the next slide, Adam? Thanks. So again, remember there are those three components: adult education, workforce preparation, and workforce training. So the first one, by definition, may be a little bit redundant, but when we're talking adult education activities, we're talking about adult education. This is written in the law, by the way, so it defines adult education as adult education. Anyway, also literacy activities, workplace adult education and literacy activities. So if you can provide the adult education on site, in the workplace, that's even better. Family literacy activities might be a part of that, or English language acquisition activities. And for those who are IELCE grantees, that's going to be your primary mode of adult education for an IET program, right? Because it's part of that English language acquisition program. Integrated English literacy and civics education, workforce preparation activities, or integrated education and training. So any of those are counting as adult education activities. And I think we're pretty familiar with those. So let's go to the next slide. The second component is workforce preparation. And oftentimes we can work in conjunction with other partners to provide this, typically probably the Department of Workforce Services. But workforce preparation, again, is defined by the law, includes activities, programs, or services that are designed to help an individual acquire a combination of basic academic skills, critical thinking skills, digital literacy skills, and the self-management skills that we sometimes refer to as soft skills. So utilizing resources, using information, working with others, understanding systems, and obtaining the skills necessary for successful transition. And again, like I said, the Department of Workforce Services can be a huge partner in providing this specific component of the integrated education and training program. Okay, so the last component, next slide, is workforce training. So these, again, according to the law, right, as defined by the law, includes occupational skills training, on-the-job training, incumbent worker training, programs that combine workplace training with related instruction, training programs operated by the private sector, skills upgrading and retraining, entrepreneurial training, transitional jobs, and job readiness if you're providing in combination with any of those. Interestingly enough, typically our adult education funds cannot be used to fund training, but if it's a legitimate integrated education and training program, then we actually can, in the context of that program, provide funding for training, right? We can use our funds for training. So that opens the doors. But again, a lot of times that training is done in partnership with other community resources, such as the Department of Workforce Services, because oftentimes they can help provide funding for that specific occupational training. Or maybe we're working with the Utah System of Higher Education, either their technical colleges, or the post-secondary, like universities, etc. So next slide. So when we're talking about specific occupations or occupational clusters, right, what we're not talking about is training a student how to use Microsoft Word or doing some resume writing. Even CPR is not specific to an occupation or occupational cluster, according to, again, federal definitions, or OSHA. Those are not, because they're too general, right? It has to be more specific to that. So better examples of specific occupations are like a welder or a certified nurse's aide, medical assistant, logistics technician, pharmacy technician, but it needs to be specific training, right? Not just generalized. Next slide. And the other piece of IET, right, is that you have to integrate those all together. We already talked about concurrent and contextual, how those have to be provided concurrently and contextually. Also, the law says that integrated education and training components have to be of sufficient intensity and quality. And we're using, best practices, the most rigorous research that we have. They're happening at the same time, again, not in a linear fashion, but at the same time. And so that's kind of a different way of saying concurrently. And C, right, is a different way of saying contextualized, right, because we're using occupationally relevant instructional materials. They're not just generalized. The biggest piece that may make an IET program, what would otherwise be an IET program, not an IET program, is if they don't have a single set of learning objectives. So when you're gathering all of these components together, right, maybe you're only providing the adult education activities, and you have Department of Workforce Services providing the workforce preparation activities, and you have your local technical college providing the actual workforce training component. Well, all of you should be meeting together to come up with a single set of learning objectives. And so, you're identifying a specific objective, and then from each of your different perspectives, coordinating how that will look in each of those different components. And so that really takes some collaboration. So let me show you a quick example of a single set of learning objectives. Next slide. Yep, thanks. So here you can see, and I don't remember because I put this together a while ago, but you're looking at, I think it is welding or something, right? You're looking at the single set, or the learning objective, my bad, is to demonstrate the ability to select correct tools to complete the required activity, right? So in each of the different components, then they're going to be adapting that objective to their component. So you can see up at the top, then they've broken that down, right? If what's that going to look like for the basic skills or the ESL? Well, they're going to list pipe measurement tools, their definitions, and state their uses, and they're going to understand units of measurement. So that's their piece. And the workforce prep is going to complete an exercise to compare which pipe cuttings had the most waste. And then the workforce training is really actually going to do that, right? So, and there's another, I think the next slide is another example of a learning objective. Will you go to the next one? Thank you. So this one, the learning objective is that they'll be able to negotiate appropriate business resolutions to address customers' requests and concerns. So this is more of a business emphasis instead of, a trade emphasis. And so you can see again that those are broken, that objective is broken out for the workforce training, the adult basic education, and the workforce preparation. And so they're aligned together in their different components to complete this single objective. And that's a really critical part of an integrated education and training. And it can look a lot of different ways. One of my favorite examples is in Uinta, where they had their English language acquisition teacher who actually went over with the students to the UV Tech and sat in class with them so that she could come back and support all that they were learning in that UV Tech classroom, right, in their English language acquisition classroom. And so that's one way of doing it. It's certainly not the only way. I mean, you could have 3 different teachers who were just meeting together and compiling this single set of learning objectives to work together. So that in 10 minutes, 15 minutes is IET. There may be lots of questions about that. Feel free to reach out, or are there questions now that you guys would like, we can address now? Okay, remember, if you're an IELC grantee, this is a required piece. So we would be wanting to see in Utopia that some of your students are enrolled in an IET program. So Adam, it's all yours.
Perfect. All right, so let me show you how to enter an IET into, or an IET student into it. The way it currently is programmed is you have to enter every student on an individual basis. So there's not a way to put an IET marker or flag on a class. You have to do it on an individual basis. So when you want to mark a student as an IET student, you actually will need to enter a new registration for the student. It's the same location that you would enter an NRS registration. Instead, this time you would be selecting a different registration. So on the student's homepage, you will go ahead and click the edit button up on the adult ed program enrollment section. When you click the edit button, it will take you to this page where you can enter new registration types for students. And when you click on the program type drop down, there's a few more registrations that you can do. You need to select the Integrated Education and Training program type. That is the IET program. That's what we're looking at doing. So just click on that, make that as your selection, and you will also need to select a registration date as well. You can only go back as far as the NRS registration is available. So in this example, back to 2/13 of 2020. If the enrollment date for NRS is in a prior program year, the farthest you can go back is 7/1 of the current program year. So in this case, it's 7/1 of 2020. You can't push it all the way back. But if you didn't start the IET program until mid-year, and that's when the student actually started, go ahead and put that in, say, 10/1 of 2020, for example, or if they did it in the spring, you can put, say, 3/1 of 2021. You can backdate this as long as it's within the NRS registration. Once you have both the program type and the registration date entered, you click the Add Program Type, and there'll be a new registration that shows up on the bottom of this screen. You can see that it's at the top right here, just above the NRS registration. There's no NRS testing or acupressure testing and everything. You can see that it is active because the separation date column says not separated. So the student is enrolled in both the NRS registration as well as the IET program registration. Now on the student's homepage, it's going to look like this. It will say it's an IET program with the enrollment date of when it started. It will be usually just above the NRS registration. It could possibly be below the NRS registration if they were enrolled at the same date. Usually NRS registrations take precedence. But you will see a brand new registration show up in their adult ed program enrollment. Now, being that we're kind of towards the end of the year, and we're asking you to make sure to go back and make sure all of these registrations for all of your students are in and active, there could be a time in which you're going to enroll a student and then pretty much immediately separate them. Or if you just have students that you're looking forward to next year or are currently enrolled in an IET program, you're going to have to separate those students at some point. So in order to separate a student, you need to go back to the same place. So you'll click Edit on the Adult Ed Program Enrollment. It will take you back to the registration screen. And off on the far right-hand side of the line down at the very bottom of the where it lists all the registrations, there's a Separate button. It's pretty easy. You simply click on the Separate button. It reloads the page. This looks very similar to how you separate where you NRS separate somebody, except this time we're just simply separating the integrated education and program type. And it states which registration you are separating at the top in bold. You'll just go ahead and select the separation date. Again, you can only separate as of today. This separation date you are able to modify and change. It is not based upon the student's last activity date. So you can modify this separation date So if you're needing to go in and do any of these students now that we're in, say, fall or the spring, and those IET programs have since closed and are done for the year, just go and mark the last day of the student's class or the last day that they got this their certification. Whenever the IET program finished with you, you'll need to mark that date. And then you'll need to select a reason as well. The reasons are identical to the NRS separations. Most of them would probably be that they separated because they met their goals. That IET program was a success for those students. So you'd select the reason met goals. If they left for any reason prior to them completing the IET, go ahead and mark those reasons as appropriate. One key thing is please do not select the checkbox down at the bottom that separates them from the program enrollment as well. You're not separating them from the program. In this case, you are just separating them from the IET registration. When you do that, it will show as a completed registration. It will have a separation date. In this case, the example is we separated them on 5/6 of 2021. And that will flag the student on any of our NRS reports as the student will be an IET student. So this is very important when it comes to Table 3. Table 3 shows us which programs the students were enrolled in. IET, IELCE as well. We will be able to see all of those flags, so those need to be done. There's also a video for that on how to mark IELCE students. But that's how you mark a student as IET, and this will correctly populate our federal tables for all students that have an IET or that are enrolled in IET. Are there any questions about what IET is for Stephanie, or is there something that we need to talk about that I missed about how to mark students in Utopia as IET?
Stephanie, I have a question. This is Therese. As far as the IET, I'm assuming that is a full. We're going to mark them as an IET student if we have a full IET, where everything is in place. For example, we have a couple of programs that we're building towards a full integrated, concurrent certification situation at the end. So like our certified nursing assistant, that's for sure a full integrated IET. We're also working with Davis Tech doing business administrative, and we're getting students ready to enter that program. We're using their curriculum. We're collaborating with their teachers, but they're not co-enrolled. Would those students be just IELCE, or would we enter them as IET students?
So when you're saying they're not co-enrolled, you're meaning?
They're not co-enrolled with Davis Tech. They are purchasing some of Davis Tech's materials. They are going over to Davis Tech to complete the class with the testing. And the teacher collaborates with Davis Tech instructors, right, to finish the course, but they are not getting Davis Tech credit for the course.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's workforce training. There's no requirement that they actually be enrolled in a separate institution to count that as workforce training. If it's training that's specific to an occupation, that can be all provided in-house, right? You could have your own teachers who provided that training. It would still be an IET. So the important piece is that they have those three components that are happening at the same time.
Okay, so it's working towards a business administrative certificate at Davis Tech. However, this is just the first 2 or 3 courses. Then we have to enroll them to finish and to show competency in those. Does that still count as an IET?
It would if you have those 3 components. If they're at the same time, right, enrolled in adult education, participating in some form of workforce preparation and workforce training. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Other questions like that? Because that was a great question, Dries. Now remember, IELCE grantees are required to provide this, but we would love to have every program provide some form of integrated education and training. So it's not limited to IELCE grantees. It's just required for them.
All right. If there's no other questions,